Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Earth 2 podcast, where we explore the origins and development of the DC multiverse and the legacy of Golden Age characters throughout the Silver and Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele, and as Peter says, we explore legacy, and legacy is the key word of this week's episode. We're almost on top of the 1964 Justice League and Justice Society team-up, where we meet some new characters who are the Crime Syndicate of America, and they live on Earth 3.
Yes.
And they are, in no real order, there is Ultraman, who is basically Superman, isn't he?
Yep.
There's
Superwoman,
who is based on Wonder Woman. Mm-hmm. There is Power Ring.
who's a Green Lantern analogue.
There is Johnny Quick.
Who's the speedster like the Flash.
And finally, there is Owlman.
Yes, who is the Batman version on Earth 3.
Yeah, and most of these characters have, is precedent the right word? There's a precedent
A
for
bit
these.
of history.
Yeah.
History to the names.
So they've been used already, and we're going to use this episode to whet your appetite before the main crossover. We're going to give you the history of the character names of the Crime Syndicate of America.
Yep, and first of all, we're going to kick off with the speedster, Johnny Quick. He's your Flash analogue here. The original Johnny Quick is a character who's a superhero. Johnny Chambers was his name. He discovered a mathematical formula, which is
3 times 2, open brackets, 9YZ, close brackets, 4A.
Which, when said aloud, gives the user super speed.
Whoosh! There we go, I've just run around the world and I've come back.
That's
Did
right.
you miss me?
That's very impressive.
I'm a big fan of the proper DC Johnny Quick.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be talking about him quite a lot, much further on.
Yeah, he's a big player once we reach All-Star Squadron. He's a regular in that, so yes.
Yeah, so just to give you his details then. Johnny Quick first appeared in issue 71 of More Fun Comics, which was published in September 1941, and that's just under 2 years after Jay Garrick, the Golden Age Flash, made his first appearance. And what's significant about Johnny is that he outran Jay Garrick quite significantly. The last issue of Jay's Flash Comics 104, went on sale December 1948, and Jay Garrick's Flash made his final appearance in issue 57 of All-Star Comics, with the Justice Society, and that was actually published in December 1950, but significantly with a 1951 cover date. And whenever people talk about the Justice Society finishing, they talk about 1951, and that's basically because the comic that their last story was published in, The Disappearing Detectives, or whichever it was, had a cover date of 1951, but they actually finished in 1950. And Johnny kept going in More Fun Comics to issue 107. We should probably point out that in the meantime, Green Arrow and Aquaman made their first appearance in issue 73 of More Fun Comics. So 2 months, that's 2 really, really big, well-known DC superheroes.
Yeah.
Johnny preceded them by 2 months. You can tell that we're Johnny Quick fans in this podcast. We're bigging him up. So Johnny was in More Fun all the way up to issue 107 and we might have mentioned this when we talked about the Crimson Avenger, when Leading Comics became a funny animal book and all the superheroes kind of all got shuffled around, the superheroes from More Fun Comics moved to Adventure Comics with issue 103. And basically, Johnny remained in Adventure Comics all the way up to issue 207, which was published in December 1954. So that's obviously 4 years after Jay Garrick disappeared. Mm-hmm. Now, to give you a bit more context, Barry Allen, as the Flash, made his first appearance in issue 4 of Showcase, which was published in July 1956.
So basically a year and a half later.
A year and a half later.
Yep, wow.
I know, and people talk about this massive sort of gap, this gulf between the Golden Age and the Silver Age, but essentially, it was about a year and a half. and also, as I say, Johnny wound up in issue 207 of Adventure Comics, but Green Arrow and Aquaman just kept going. They were like Superman, Wonder Woman and Batman. They were pretty much the only DC characters to be published throughout.
Yep.
So yeah, all props to Johnny, really.
Yeah, so when you think about it, the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick, is the most prominent speedster of the Golden Age. Mm-hmm. But even although Johnny debuted 2 years after Jay's debut, he finished 4 years after Jay's last appearance. Yeah. So Johnny certainly outlasted him. Yeah,
so Johnny was in publication longer than Jay Garrick. Mm-hmm. It's insane to actually think about that.
Yeah.
It's by right. I almost feel that by rights, Johnny should have been in Flash of Two Worlds somehow.
We don't ever get a Johnny Quick of Two Worlds.
No, we don't.
That's a missed opportunity.
Johnny, he will appear eventually, and then, as Peter said, he's a major player in the All-Star Squadron, so eventually we'll hear quite a lot about him.
Yeah.
But no, he disappears in 54, and he's not seen again until the mid-70s, more or less. Pete's been taking a little look at his last story from issue 207 of Adventure Comics.
And it's headed up Johnny Quick and his magic formula. And this story is called The Courtship of Tubby Watts. That was Johnny's comedy sidekick.
Yeah.
That was a big thing back then.
We've talked about that vaguely before, I think, haven't we, about sidekicks and stuff.
Basically, it is Tubby getting a bit of a romantic interest, so to speak.
She's not very nice, and she kind of strings him along and all that, and Johnny decides to kind of intervene and stop his mate getting the mickey ripped out of him.
Yeah, and one thing we hadn't mentioned actually is his speed formula just gives him an initial burst of speed. The rest is momentum, but he can channel it into flight, which is something that Jay couldn't do.
Yeah.
So that's something that's different about the character. But yes, it's lots of fun and shenanigans on a boat, and Tubby realises he's better off without her, and he takes Tubby out for a meal to cheer him up.
Yep.
And the very final thing that Johnny says before he goes out of publication is, as Johnny Chambers, "Here you are, Tubby, hamburgers, all you can eat on me."
And Tubby says, "Oh boy, I'll take a dozen. And may they choke me if I ever worry over a dame again."
The end.
The end, so yeah.
And that was the end for them.
Yeah, and...
For a time.
And they both turn up in All-Star Squadron, so we'll see Johnny again before too long.
Yes. But, as we said, there's more than one hero, or one legacy character we're talking about today, so we'll move on to the next one.
And the next character we're going to talk about is Owlman. We're going to be reading a story from issue 107 of Batman, but before we get there, Pete has some information on another character.
Yeah, there was a Golden Age hero from Dell Comics called the Owl, who first appeared in Crackerjack Funny's issue 25 in July 1940. He became the cover star as of June 1941 with issue 36. And he ran for quite some time, and then he came back in 1967 for a 2-issue Gold Key Comics run, and that was written by Superman co-creator Jerry Siegel.
Am I right in thinking there's a Marvel villain called the Owl as
there
well?
Also is a Marvel villain called the Owl. He's a Daredevil villain.
Daredevil villain. Ah,
yes.
Interesting.
Interesting, as you will find out
yeah,
soon.
Okay. Very interesting. So anyway, yes. Batman issue 107, which has a cover date of April 1957 and was published last week of February 1957. There's a couple of stories in this issue of Batman, and the one we are doing is called The Grown-Up Boy Wonder, and this story is featured on the cover. Quite an exciting cover.
It is, yes.
We have sort of truck coming out from under a bridge. Batman's leaping down in the truck, and there's a couple of lads driving the truck, and one of them sort of looking out and exclaiming, "It's Batman, and that fellow who's taken Robin's place, Owlman." And as well as Batman, there's a character, he looks not a million miles away from Hawkman in some ways.
Yeah, it's part Hawkman, part Aquaman actually, with the look of the tunic.
Yeah, it looks kind of scaled, and he's got little wings on his boots, and he has a mask which looks like an owl, and sort of red wings. The significant we'll point out is that the tunic's sort of in yellow on the cover. And Owlman is thinking to himself, "They don't know I'm really Robin."
Gasp.
So here we are, yes.
Straight into the story. What's this? Has the famed crime-fighting team of Batman and Robin actually split up? Has Batman allied himself with a new partner? Is the boy wonder through? Each question has 2 answers, yes and no. You'll soon learn how this paradox is possible when you read the astonishing story of The Grown-Up Boy Wonder.
And in this opening / panel, it's a rooftop scene, and Batman is having fisticuffs with 3 gentlemen in red all-in-one costumes.
Yes.
And swinging in on a line is Owlman. And Owlman says, "Don't worry, Batman. Owlman will save you."
And one of the bad guys says, "Look, Batman's got a new partner." And another one says,
"Yeah, he's got a man to take Robin's place."
Into the story. One night, in the subsurface Batcave, Bruce Wayne and young Dick Grayson, who are actually Batman and Robin, examine a queer object.
Yes, and we see Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson, Bruce in a brown suit and Dick in his traditional red jumper and white shirt collar, and they're looking at it's just a box, and it's glowing. And Bruce Wayne says,
"There it is, Dick. The thing Superman found floating in outer space. It's lead-lined, so Superman couldn't use his X-ray vision on it."
"And he left it with us until he got back from his current mission. I wonder what's inside," says Dick.
As Dick wrongly touches the outer surface.
Hang on a sec, PC. I'm reading from the reprint in Robin, the Boy Wonder, a celebration of 75 years, and the caption here only says, "As Dick touches the outer surface." There is no wrongly.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting.
Okay.
So anyway, yes, as Dick touches the outer surface. "Bruce, it's giving off a gas! Look out!"
Great Scott! You must have touched a secret release. and the gas has knocked you out.
And in the panel, Dick has opened the box. There's a nice couple of bits of scientific equipment and a filing cabinet to add detail, and there's the gases sort of coming out the box. I like the little waste paper basket with all the stuff poking out of it.
Of course,
that's great.
yes.
That's lovely.
Bat trash.
Yeah, so the gas is sort of emanating in Dick's down, and we move on to page 2.
It is morning before the youngster swims back to consciousness.
We can see a bedside table with a lamp and a glass of water, and Dick's lying on his bed, and Bruce is sat next to him. Dick is regaining consciousness, and he says, "Oh, feels so funny."
Great Scott, Dick! Look at yourself in the mirror. The mirror reflects a fantastic, unbelievable image.
Golly, during the night I've grown as big as a man. And sure enough, Bruce looks astonished in this panel as Dick is still wearing the teenage Dick Grayson clothes, because the trousers are demonstratively too short for now. He's looking in a full-length mirror, and he's become an adult. And the next panel, Dick says, "That strange gas. It causes sudden growth to anyone who breathes it. Golly, Bruce, how long will I stay like this?"
I don't know. The effect could be permanent. When Superman returns in a few days, maybe he'll know what to do about this.
That night, Brucey's words prove prophetic as he sees...
And we see the bat signal outside of the window of presumably Wayne Manor, and Bruce is already getting into his Batman costume, and he declares,
"The bat signal." And Dick says,
"I'd better get my Robin garb on, fast. It won't fit. What am I going to do?" And we see Dick holding up the now sort of child-sized Robin outfit and looking slightly perturbed, and Batman says,
"Stay home. Don't you realise if people see a suddenly grown-up Dick Grayson and a grown-up Robin, they'll connect the two identities? And since you're my ward, people will realise Bruce Wayne is Batman."
And the next panel, Dick is holding another Batman costume, and he says, "I've got an idea. Since I'm a man now, why can't there be two of us? Two Batmen?"
"No, Dick. You may look like a man, but you think like a boy. Act like a boy. You've got a lot of growing to do before you're really a man." But when Batman leaves, Dick reacts like an impulsive youngster.
And we see Dick, who's gone into another cupboard, and he's taken out the Owlman costume that we saw on the cover in the splash panel, basically. And Dick thinks to himself, "I'll show him I'm a real man. This owl costume Bruce was going to wear to the masquerade ball next week. It's just what I need." Terribly worried that my Dick Grayson voice is all over the place, but that's what happens.
No, it's fine.
That's what happens in puberty.
That's it. Voice is cracked.
Yes.
There we go.
So we move on to page 3.
As Batman heeds the police alarm, he is unaware that the Batmobile carries a stowaway.
And we see the Batmobile speeding along country lane with Owlman hanging off the back, and Batman is receiving a radio message.
"Calling Batman. Bandits seen atop the Martier Jewelry Building. Investigate."
We then cut to the rooftop scene that we saw in the splash panel. Beautifully lit. There's the moon. There's one of those water towers that you always see in the rooftops of buildings and comics. And 3 guys in red outfits who we met in the splash panel on top of a roof. Batman is running towards them. And one of the guys in the red costumes says, "We got the diamonds. Huh? Batman!" And Batman thinks,
"The Daredevils again. The 3 circus acrobats who turned bandits."
yeah, so these chaps in the red, they're called the Daredevils.
Yes.
And Daredevils, and they're quite acrobatic looking.
Yeah, all in one outfits with cowl.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And it's about 7 years before Marvel first published a character called Daredevil, who was all in red and a bit acrobatic
yeah.
and things.
We'll post some pictures of the Daredevils on
Yes.
on Facebook and on social media, so you can
draw
compare
your-
and contrast.
Draw your own conclusions. So anyway,
It's 3 against 1 until another Kate figure joins the uneven battle.
and we're basically at the splash panel now. Batman's getting stuck into the Daredevils, and Owlman sweeps in from the side, and he says, "Okay, Batman, now let's show them how the team of Batman and Owlman can work on crooks."
And one of the Daredevils says, "Look, Batman's got a new partner."
"Batman's got a man to take Robin's place."
And Batman's thinking, "Dick, wearing my masquerade costume. That foolish kid disobeyed my orders. I'd tan his hide if he wasn't so big now."
Wow, all of a sudden he's a very big Dick.
Is that still in the reprint?
Yes.
Okay,
that's
cool.
word for word, yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Without warning, a bandit slams a glass capsule before the crime fighters.
And sure enough, we see a cloud of gas starting to billow up around Owlman and Batman. Owlman says, "What? Can't see."
"Tear gas," says Batman.
And we move on to the next pattern. This is a cracker. One of the daredevils is leaping off the building that they're on, and you can see the cloud of gas behind him. All three of them are starting to move, and he's casting a massive sort of shadow down the building as he leaps for a flagpole. It's brilliant. It's really, really nice. And the caption says,
"While the crime fighters are momentarily blinded, one acro bandit dives at a jutting steel bar that once held an advertising sign.
oh, right enough, yeah, that's cool. Nice little detail there.
Hooking his legs around it, he waits as the second daredevil leaps for his grasping hands.
Alley-oop, says one of the daredevils.
Then he swings the second daredevil towards a fire escape rung on the next building. The trapezing is repeated by the third bandit.
And there's basically a sequence of 3 panels where we see the bandits leaping off the roof, flipping each other and landing on the fire escape. I mean, it's really nice.
It really does look like, Marvel's Daredevil, especially that middle panel. We'll post that picture up.
Because there's loads of panels where you see, it happens quite often in Spider-Man, when Spidey's obviously got a lot of thinking to do, and they'll show a sequence within a panel of 5 or 6 Spidey figures sort of moving as he has all the thoughts, and then the final one comes into full focus, and it puts me very much in mind of that. It's very good.
Finally, the first daredevil leaps towards his dangling companion, who swings out to meet him.
So we see that one of the daredevils is climbing up the fire escape. The middle one is still hanging off, but he's caught the final one. Presumably he's going to flip the final one up. So there we can see them in the background, in the foreground of the panel, in silhouette and casting a brilliant shadow. This is a really nice page, actually. I really must say. And it's Owlman, and Owlman thinks to himself, they'll get away over that rooftop unless I cut them off.
Then Batman's eyes clear and widen in horror.
Yes, because Owlman has leapt off the building. He's going for a flagpole, not the same pole that the Daredevil's waiting for. And Owlman cries, I can grab that flagpole, get inside the building through the window, and go upstairs to the roof. Batman at this distance, I can tell he's very perturbed because he says,
No, stop! But the impetuous youngster doesn't realise that a flagpole that can hold a boy won't hold a man.
And sure enough, Owlman has reached the flagpole, but it breaks with a sort of very loud crack. Oh, I forgot. I'm too heavy for it now.
But alert Batman has already acted and snatches the rash youngster from impending doom.
Yeah, we see that Batman has swung down the line and he's grabbed Owlman round the waist. Owlman's still holding on to the pole, and Batman says,
Still acting like a kid, still rushing ahead without thinking.
And this is probably, we should actually mention at this point maybe that the costume's a different colour in the story to what it is in the cover. On the cover it's a yellow tunic, yellow boots, yellow gloves, and a sort of mainly red sort of set of wings and mask, whereas in the story the tunic and boots and gloves are all green, and it's a more sort of browny, sort of bronzy, orangey sort of colour for the wings and the mask. Anyway.
And so the Daredevil bandits escape. But the crime fighters cannot escape from the next day's headlines.
And we see a news reporter with some newspaper headlines sort of flashing up behind him, and the headlines say things like, Batman teams up with new partner, it's Batman and Owlman now, and the reporter says,
Today, all the world asks, what has happened to Robin? Is the boy wonder finished?
And there's a slow dissolve to some dodgy criminal guys all sat in their den, and the captain says,
And in the dark haunts of criminals...
And one of the criminals says,
Things weren't tough enough when we had to worry about Batman and a kid.
Yeah, now we got 2 men to worry about.
Robin's absence brings problems, and Dick Grayson's absence brings the truant officer.
And it's a slow dissolve, presumably to the outside of Wayne Manor. We can see a car parked. And obviously Bruce Wayne has answered the door, and he's standing talking to a man who we don't really see too clearly, just seen from the back, in a black suit wearing a hat. He must be the truant officer.
Yes, and he says,
I'm checking on why Dick was absent from school. Is he sick?
In a way, he hasn't been himself lately. He'll be back to normal soon, I hope. For the first time, Dick sadly feels the sudden loss of his youth.
In the next panel, we see Dick watching some of his mates playing baseball, and he thinks to himself, all my school chums are over there, and I'll never be able to pal around with them again.
But Dick's new adult physique also gives him overconfidence.
And we see Dick admiring himself in the mirror, taps off in his shorts, and he's flexing, and he thinks, what muscles? I'm as big as Batman now. And I'll bet I can be as big a crime buster too. I'll show Batman I'm as good as he is. Then we see Dick thinking to himself, stroking his chin, and he's like, if I were Batman, how would I go about tracking down the daredevils?
That night, once again clad as Owlman, the impulsive boy scales a criminal hangout.
And we see the daredevils with a couple of bits of gear on a table in front of them, obviously stuff that they've stolen, and they've taken them to a character who we learn is called Frankie the Fence. And Frankie the Fence is kind of baldy, He has a suit and a black waistcoat, and he's got a jeweller's eyeglass, and he's examining a gem. And I love the fact that one of the Daredevils is smoking.
Yeah, the other two have got like Terry Thomas moustaches.
Yeah. Maybe we should talk like that. Anyway,
No.
So we see the silhouette of Owlman outside the villain's hideout, and he thinks to himself, the Daredevils, just as I figured. Only Frankie the Fence is big enough to buy and cut up the diamonds they stole.
Once again, he acts rashly.
Yep, Owlman busts through the window, thinking, I'll show Batman. I'll handle them all by myself. And one of the Daredevils cries,
Owlman!
But, forgetting how tall he is now, he doesn't duck under a low beam as he charges forward and...
Yes, with an sound effect, we see that Owlman has battered his head off one of the support beams in the building, and a rather delighted Daredevil says,
What a break! He knocked himself out! This guy who's taking Robin's place. If we identify him, we can track down Batman's identity through his.
And the Daredevil's reaching down to take off Owlman's mask.
Gasp.
And the caption says,
An eager hand reaches for Owlman's cowl, and the grown-up boy wonder is unmasked.
One of the Daredevils says,
Huh, I never saw that man's face before. And another one says,
I don't recognise it either. Let's take the guy to a hideout. Maybe we can make him talk.
That's obviously the Terry Thomas one.
I think so.
Yes.
Do you think? You think?
Maybe.
Later,
Owlman has woken up. Dick Grayson's woken up. And he says, I did it again. And this time Batman isn't around to rescue me. If only he'd gone to Frankie the Fence too. And we see a voice from off camera.
but I did, just as they were driving away with you.
And Batman climbs in the window. And Dick says, Batman, Gup, you were right. I've still got a lot of growing up to do before I can be a real man.
Well, as long as you can admit that, then you're not a kid any longer.
Hooray, this is good, they're pals. Right, so anyway.
Minutes later, the team of Batman and Owlman renew their attack on Crimedom.
Presumably this is still in the same building where they're going to see Frankie the Fence.
It must be a warehouse he's in.
Yeah, it must be. Because we see like overhead gantries and lights and stuff and piles of crates. And the Daredevils are at one end of the room, and Batman and Owlman are rushing towards them, and Batman says,
Come on, partner, let's show them how a couple of men can fight.
and we see one of the Daredevils sort of in close-up, he's legging it, and Owlman leaps in from behind him, jumping onto a mattress, and the caption says,
As one acro bandit tries to escape, the grown-up boy wonder leaps forward and demonstrates his own acrobatic skill, born of a boyhood in the circus.
and there's a really good panel of Owlman jumping and flipping forward on the mattress, which is there, and that's what I was saying about Spider-Man earlier on.
Yes,
It's a very similar sort of,
The
fluid,
after image kind of thing. Mhm.
fluid panel that shows the motion. And then in the next panel, Owlman lands on top of the Daredevil and he shouts, Alley-oop!
As for Batman,
And the final panel of page 7 is Batman casting a massive silhouette over the room as two of the Daredevils run in opposite directions. And Batman thinks to himself,
one breaking to the right, the other to the left. How can I bring them both down with one move?
and we move on to page 8, and the caption says,
Hurling himself upon a desk chair, he rides its spinning wheels.
and sure enough, Batman is zooming forward on a swivel chair.
Sure.
He's having a great time. Whee! And he says,
I'm almost close enough now. One mighty kick sends the chair careening to the left as the acrobat man propels himself to the right.
and this is a great panel in the background. We see one of the Daredevils being knocked off his feet by the zooming office chair. It's cracking, and Batman is bringing down the other one by grabbing him around the waist. And Batman says,
Double play completed. Later, upon delivering their prisoners to jail,
and we see Owlman and Batman outside the police office, and Owlman's looking a bit dizzy. And he says, suddenly feel weak, going to pass out. Very carelessly, given that they're on a public street, Batman says,
Dick.
obviously rushing forward to catch him.
Hours later, Dick Grayson regains consciousness.
And we see Dick Grayson, now a child again, still wearing the Owlman costume, sat on a mattress that's lying on the floor in the Batcave, which doesn't look dodgy at all. And there's a nice dizzy spiral effect above Dick, and he says, Batman, my Owlman costume, it's swimming on me.
Yes, the effect of that maturing gas must have been only temporary. You're a boy again.
Slow dissolve.
In prison next morning.
And we see the three Daredevils in a prison cell, and they're all still wearing their Daredevil costumes, which is quite funny.
Yeah.
And one of the Daredevils says,
We'll get even with Batman. We'll expose his identity now that we know what his partner looks like. Another one says,
Sure. All we have to do is identify the face of the man we saw under the Owlman mask.
And in the final panel, the caption reads, but they're unaware that man exists no longer for...
And we see an excited and delighted Dick Grayson running to play with his pals, and he cries, Gee, it's good to be a kid again. Hey, fellas, wait for me. The end. So is that the shortest story we've done so far?
It's an 8-pager, I don't know.
Yeah.
Have we not done a 6?
An 8-page giant.
Yes.
So that's, Owlman. I've just suddenly had a thought, this might be preempting and jumping ahead, but obviously on Earth 3,
yes,
the Owlman is the Batman equivalent, as we'll find out. As we'll find out in the next instalment. I wonder, is he Bruce Wayne, or was he an aged Dick Grayson?
Oh, there's a thought. Because we don't actually find out the identity of that version of Owlman.
I don't think we ever do.
Post-crisis, there's a definite identity for him, but we're not dealing with that. No. We're not going to get to there yet.
No.
But, his identity is not revealed, and he doesn't look like Bruce Wayne.
No,
really, when you see him unmasked.
Yeah. Because the Earth 3 Owlman's mask is quite...
It's quite open.
It doesn't really cover his face. It's quite like Starman's. Interesting. That was DC's first Owlman, a whole 7 or so years before we meet the Earth 3 equivalent, and a whole week before you meet the Earth 3 equivalent, listener.
So that's Johnny Quick and Owlman we've discussed, and the next member of the Crime Syndicate of America we're going to talk about is Superwoman and her precursor. Our precursors, because it's a name that's been used many, many, many times over the years, hasn't it, David?
Many times indeed. Superwoman is essentially Wonder Woman.
Yes.
In the CSA, but we'll get to that in time. So, several stories published prior to the appearance of the Crime Syndicate of America using the name Superwoman, several after, some of which we'll cover eventually, some we won't. The very first one that we've been able to find is a story from issue 60 of Action Comics, and it's called Lois Lane Superwoman. Now, Action Comics issue 60, published in March 1943, cover date of May 1943. We're just going to give you a sort of summary of the story. We're not going to read the whole thing, because we'd be here all day if we did all the Superwoman stories. And the story of this one basically is Lois Lane gets knocked down and suffers a brain concussion. She gets a blood transfusion from Superman, and the transfusion gives Lois Lane sort of powers, and she becomes, as you might have guessed, she becomes Superwoman. A criminal scientist named Dr. Scowl captures Superman with a plan to sort of do him in, basically, and thankfully, Lois Lane, Super Lois, rescues Superman. But then, Lois is a bit of a cop-out. She wakes up and it's all been a dream.
Yes.
Which is the worst.
Superman was away actually getting a surgeon to go and save her.
Yeah.
While she was unconscious.
But she gets better, obviously. But it's weird. I mean, it's one of those... At this point, there's not really continuity as such. Nowadays, if something like that happened, there might be a recurring plot line for a couple of years about Lois having had a brain injury and all that sort of stuff. It's a one and done, 1943. Then the next one isn't until 1959, in issue 8 of Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, because she got her own comic eventually. Published in February 1959 with a cover date of April 1959. A story which is called The Superwoman of Metropolis. Superman gives Lois temporary superpowers for her birthday, and she puts on a blonde wig, decides to keep her identity secret, and basically a reversal of the Clark Kent Lois Lane dynamic. Clark goes around trying to prove that Lois is the new Superwoman, which makes it hard for Lois to do her superpowered stuff. So Lois manages to keep a lid on the secret identity for a few times. Eventually she has to reveal herself in order to make a rescue. The powers have worn out by this point, so Clark secretly makes the rescue using his Superman powers. And he thinks it's funny that Lois pretended to be Superwoman, which gives Lois an idea of how much of a pest she is to Superman by constantly trying to figure out his secret identity.
That's a nice twist.
Another thing. Yeah. And probably it lasted for the duration of that issue. She just went back to her normal. So the next one is very soon after that, in issue 15 of Lois Lane, which came out in December 1959 with a publication date of February 1960. And this story is called The Super Family of Steel. And it's quite interesting because it's basically about a Lois lookalike called Sylvia DeWitt, who marries a Superman lookalike called Van Zee. And he's from Kandor. Mm-hmm. And it's just about the life they have together and how Sylvia DeWitt becomes the equivalent of his Superwoman. Oh. So it's not really
It's, again, using the name, but it's not really...
It's quite a nice story, actually. It's quite poignant. The next one is almost immediately. It's in issue 17 of Lois Lane, published in March 1960, cover date April 1960, and it's called Lana Lang Superwoman. In this one, both Lana and Lois get blood transfusions. Superman leaves Earth, has a mission to carry out, and he leaves the ladies behind. Both Lois and Lana, they're hypnotically drawn to an old barn which explodes when they arrive, and obviously they would have died if they didn't have the superpowers. Superman comes back to Earth and explains that Brainiac had planned to destroy Earth unless Superman left Earth and left Lois and Lana to face the explosion. Obviously, with superpowers, the girls survived the blast, but the powers soon wear off. And Brainiac agrees to leave Earth alone since Superman actually met his challenge by going off to Earth and leaving the girls unprotected. But obviously, he didn't put any... Peter's looking very...
It doesn't sound very Brainiac-y,
I know,
does it?
exactly.
No,
yeah, I mean, it's a weird one, and it's a very disposable 9-page story in the middle of an issue of Lois Lane, so it's about, again, Silver Age as it gets. To me, it's baffling, because you always think of Brainiac as being utterly sadistic. I always think of that.
Yeah, well, I think it was quite clinical and, logical and,
and
not personal. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just, I suppose the word I'm thinking of is just so precise and very methodical and,
pernickety.
Yeah, precise is, I suppose, the best word for it. So doing something as daft as this just is like,
yeah.
What? Anyway, we move over to Action Comics, issue 274, with a cover date of March 1961 and on sale in January 1961. And the story in this one, again, it's a bit of a head scratcher. So basically, there's an experiment going on to find an antidote for kryptonite, and Superman's powers end up being transferred to Lois Lane. Now that he no longer has powers, Superman proposes to Lois, and she decides to think about it first. When she finds out she has powers, she decides not to marry Superman in case that any enemies that she makes go after him, which is quite a nice and interesting motivation, which I'm sure many superheroes have expressed over the years. Superman then passes out, and it's revealed that this was a robot because the real Superman turns up.
Okay.
Yeah, and the robot wanted to see if Lois loved Superman only because of his powers. The real Superman apologises for the robot's misbehaviour and returns it to the fortress, and Lois's powers then wear off, restoring her to normal. I don't get how the robot having powers could be transferred.
It's very Silver Age.
Yeah. So, I mean, it puts me in mind of the Action Comics story we did last week with Hercules and all that, which left us with many, many questions and stuff. This one leaves me similarly nonplussed. I mean, it's a great cover. It's an idea that Lois has got the powers now, but it's kind of the robot passing on the powers. It's inbuilt to the robot's function. How would it be able to transfer? I don't know. So anyway, yes, that was Action Comics 274. So the very next one is another issue of Action Comics, published in April 62 with a cover date of June 62. And it's also worth pointing out, a month later, in issue 98 of Superboy, a Legion of Superheroes member called Ultra Boy makes his first appearance, but we'll mention him in proper context in a little while. So the next Superwoman related story is in Action Comics issue 289. And it's a story called Superman's Super Courtship. In preparation, I read this, and you know what, I really didn't like it. You know what we said about the way female superhero characters like Lois Lane and Supergirl and Lana Lang are sort of portrayed? It's basically Supergirl decides to try and play matchmaker for Superman.
Right.
She tries setting him up. There's sort of three parts to the story. She tries setting him up with Helen of Troy. Okay. It doesn't end well. And then there's a story with the adult Legion of Superheroes in the future. Mm-hmm. Supergirl tries setting Superman up with the adult version of Saturn Girl, Saturn Woman. And there's a really horrible, inappropriate sort of couple of panels when Supergirl is arranging for mistletoe to be above Superman and Saturn Woman, so that they end up. I know Pete's got his head in his hands at the moment.
That's dreadful.
So they end up. We'll put it on the socials. So they end up kissing a couple of times, much to the grown-up Lightning lads.
Oh, crikey.
He's not impressed with this at all. So that doesn't end well. No. And then in the third segment of it, and this is kind of weird, Supergirl spots on an alien planet a sort of equivalent version of herself as an adult, and she's called Luma Liney.
Sounds like a kind of a gangster type. Hey, I'm Lou Malini.
Hey, do you want a coffee? I got to drink it myself. That sort of thing. It's creepy cousins again, because she's basically, there's a whole thing when Superman says if he was to marry someone, he would want them to be someone like Supergirl, but they can't marry because they're cousins. It's horrible. So basically, Clark is set up with Luma Liney, but the yellow sun rays of our sun prove harmful, so they can't be together.
Oh no.
And Luma Liney is basically, Superwoman.
Yes.
Equivalent, and it says so much about attitudes and things in America at the time. It's really like, ew. And that brings us up to the most recent one before the Crime Syndicate made their appearance, and that's in issue 47 of Lois Lane, published in December 1963. What a night, with a cover date of February 64. And this is called The Super Life of Lois Lane. It's a brilliant cover. The cover calls her Superwoman. The story is basically a Fortress of Solitude computer simulation. It's another imaginary dream sort of story where Lois's character is called Kryptonite Girl, but the costume she wears on the cover is very similar to Superwoman of the CSA.
Yes, it is.
She has a mask, which CSA Superwoman doesn't have, but it's a black sort of leotard effort and boots and stuff. And she's quite a fetching high ponytail. Big fan of fetching high ponytails. It's Superwoman on the cover, but not really in the story, and it is what it is. It's fine. So as we see, there's been quite a few occasions when other people have been called Superwoman for the point of a story, but no real strong, solid, established Superwoman characters. However, that does change, and we'll talk about some of those characters properly, but Pete's going to give you some details just now.
Yeah, one we'll definitely be talking about near the time, well, which doesn't turn up until about 1983, is the character of Kristen Wells, who is Superwoman. She originally appeared in a novel, Miracle Monday by Elliot S. Magan, the Superman writer. But then she was introduced into comics as Superwoman in DC Comics Presents Annual 2. She does also briefly appear in Superman Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
Right.
She's in a panel in that, trying to get into the Fortress of Solitude, which is an incredible story.
But we'll probably end up doing that, I suppose, won't we?
That,
yeah, but that won't be for a very, very long time.
Yes. Certainly it's a character that, has taken on the mantle of Superwoman, and there are many more, and we're not going to cover them all, so do not panic, dear listener, or else this will become the Superwoman podcast.
Yes.
Post-crisis, there have been several characters with the name, and even as recently as the events in DC Rebirth, but as not one but two, Superwoman, one Lois Lane and one Lana Lang.
Yeah, I bought a couple of the variant covers of that series. They're really nice.
Yeah, it was Phil Jimenez on that. It was really good. I really quite enjoyed the series. No one read it, but I enjoyed it.
It's always the way, isn't it?
So that's looking at the ancestry and the legacy of Superwoman. But let's move on to the ancestry of our next member of the Crime Syndicate of America, and that is Ultraman.
Yep, Ultraman, who's basically the Superman equivalent in the CSA. And Pete's going to tell us a bit more about the other Ultraman.
Yes. The original Ultraman was a character called Gary Concord. He was a scientist, and he first appeared in All American Comics, issue 8. That's from November 1939. And it's interesting because although he's Ultraman, he's only Ultraman for 2 issues of his run. Because basically his son takes on the role of Ultraman.
How does that come about then?
Well, what happens is, he's a contemporary, well, I say contemporary, of the time. He's a scientist. He's born in 1915, found as an orphan on the World War I battlefields, and he decides he's going to fight against war, and becomes an expert in warfare. What's really weird is, this is published, right, just on the cusp of World War II kicking off. He's an adult in 1950, and that's when World War II breaks out. So you can see it's pretty much invalidated the story straight away.
Yeah, so like every idea that they had about him and how he was based, now he worked, was overtaken by real world events, basically.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. The interesting thing with that is, because obviously at the moment we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's going to be interesting to see how, going forward at this point, our heroic fiction reflects it. Will it be mentioned at all? It's going to be interesting to see how things pan out. Anyway,
well, we are people that enjoy stories about masked people.
yeah.
So yeah, but yes. So what happens is World War II kicks off, and in 1950, and America is bombed, and he's trapped in his lab at the time.
Right.
And it sets off some chemicals in his lab, and it creates this suspended animation foam that he gets trapped in.
Okay.
And he wakes up in the far future, in the year 2174. But when he wakes up, he's not himself. His body has been developed. It's almost like a super soldier serum.
Like the way Steve Rogers is sort of affected by Vita rays and all that sort of stuff. So he's been frozen for 200 years and then wakes up. It's a touch the Buck Rogers, isn't it?
It's very Buck Rogers, and the stories are written very much in that kind of action sci-fi strip that was very popular at the time. Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, that sort of thing. But what's interesting is there are many comparisons to Ultraman and Captain America you can make. But Ultraman first appeared, as I said, in 1939, but Captain America didn't appear until the 20th of December 1940.
All right, okay.
But remember, Captain America was in suspended animation and reappeared in Avengers 4.
Of course.
Right.
Right.
And they brought him back then. But that wasn't part of the character then, because that was the 60s when they brought him back. Just a coincidence, really, but I just find it really interesting to compare the two.
Yeah.
And there's another comparison we'll do when I talk about them later on.
Okay.
But yes, so he finds himself in the United States of North America, as it's called now.
Right.
And there's the usual tyranny and people trying to attack and take over the country and stuff, and he basically overthrows that and becomes a hero, and that's fine. This story takes place as part of a flashback over 2 issues of All American Comics because he's not the main Ultraman.
Right.
He has a son.
Okay.
And that's Gary Concord Jr. because he's not very inventive at coming up with names for his children. And it's his son who's the main Ultraman and actually goes through the rest of all the adventures. Gary Concord Sr. dies, and this is his legacy to his son. So it's literally the first legacy character.
Wow. So what happens then that Gary Jr. takes over? Is there a big battle and Gary Sr. then has to bequeath a legacy? I mean, it seems after, if he's only the hero for like 2 stories, it seems like he was almost just getting started and then he's cut down in his prime and his son has to take over. So what actually happens?
He lived to the age of 100 and then died of natural causes.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right, so how old was Junior when he took over? That's insane.
I don't think it actually gives his date. No, hang on. Junior is 25.
So
he's obviously 75 when he was sired.
Senior was 75, right? Wow, okay.
So Gary Jr. succeeds his dad as both Ultraman and also as the High Moderator of the United States of North America.
Wow.
Basically the protector of the realm, so to speak.
Interesting.
And yet there's a warlord called Tor who is attacking. The Gary Concord stories are really weird because it starts off very much a serialised story. Each issue is about 6 pages. It runs in All American Comics from issue 8 up to issue 19. Up to issue 13, it's all pretty much one story with like the 2-issue recap of setting everything up at the beginning with Gary Concord Sr. And the rest of it is all this one big serialised story. It's almost like a Republic serial.
Yeah.
Action adventure thing.
I mean, I love it though as a setup. It's brilliant. It's like, contemporary guy gets gassed, falls asleep, wakes up 200 years in the future, blah, 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 has a son who then... I mean, it's not typical at all, is it?
No, it's
really sophisticated for the time.
So this warlord called Tor is trying to get...
That's a familiar name, isn't it?
It's been used a few times.
There was a Joe Cougar book published by DC in the 70s, wasn't it, with that name? So there's another bit of legacy for you.
Yeah, that's true. But this warlord Tor is basically looking to get access to some of the weapons that Gary Concord Sr. and probably Junior as well, because he developed weapons as well, created. And I think it's mostly foam-based weaponry. There seems to be a running theme. So yes, this story continues all the way through to issue 13, where it's finally resolved. But Gary Concord, typical of heroes at the time, has got a comedy sidekick called Guppy.
Right.
But Guppy dies in issue 13.
All right, so like Guppy presumably is a tropical fish who gets knocked out of the tank.
If only. No, he's just like a hapless, sidekick.
Right.
But he gets killed.
What happens?
In issue 13. He sacrifices, he gets killed trying to save Gary and help protect everyone.
Oh.
And stop the warlords.
That's a shame.
But yeah.
Guppy, we hardly knew you.
No. After that, the stories become one-shots, just one-and-done 8-page stories, which is so weird considering we've had so much build-up over one big story.
Yeah.
And also another interesting part of it is we've got issue 14, that's called Miasma of Death. And in issue 14, there is a great, massive one-page advert advertising the Big Six.
Right.
Now, this is... DC/All American. There was 2 companies at the time where they kind of worked together.
Yeah.
It was their big advertising campaign for their main books. So they had their 6 main books, and they had a representative character for each of the books.
Right.
So you had Action Comics with a big picture of Superman. You had Adventure Comics with a big picture of Sandman.
Right.
Detective, Batman obviously.
Surely.
Flash Comics, Flash obviously. More Fun Comics, they had the Spectre.
Right.
And All American Comics.
Presumably Green Lantern.
Not yet.
Oh,
he's not appeared yet.
Yeah.
Ultraman.
Right.
Ultraman was there on issue 14.
Right.
There wasn't an advert for it in issue 15.
Okay.
Issue 16 is the first appearance of Green Lantern.
Of course, right.
And Ultraman is replaced in the advert
by Green Lantern.
In that all the other characters stay the same. So obviously they knew Ultraman was in the outs then.
Right.
Ultraman also makes an appearance in another one-shot story from All-Star Comics #1.
Yes,
he's part
that's
of the
right.
anthology.
I mean, I think that's the only one that I've actually read.
Yeah,
yeah,
because it's quite a nice. It's a nice wee story.
Because eventually, of course, the DC Archive series reprinted the first 2 non-Justice Society issues of All-Star.
It's really interesting. If you can ever get a chance to read them, you should check them out.
Yeah. So when was Gary Concord Ultraman's final appearance then?
It was in issue 9. Well, from his original run, it was in issue 19
Of All American?
of All American Comics.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and that was August 1940. Now, something else happened in issue 19.
Yep, of course, that's the first appearance of the Atom.
It certainly is. The Golden Age Atom, yep.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of every Gary Concord story, it always said, tune in next issue for continuing the story or whatever.
Yeah.
And the end of issue 19, his story, it said, check out next issue for Adventures in the Unknown, which was a strip that had run earlier on in All American. All American was mostly a reprint comic, reprinting comic strips at the time.
Of course,
there were a few. There's Hop Harrigan, there's Red, White and Blue, there was obviously Gary Concord, but in Scribbly.
Yeah,
Scribbly
and it
was,
ultimately became
my
All
uncle.
American Men of War once the once the superhero sort of boom faded out.
That's right.
Very interesting.
So yeah, that is.
So
It's kind of a lost character.
Aye, it's almost like as you say, when they cut him from the All American advert and superheroes became more and more popular, they probably sort of thought, and as you say, real world events, with the Second World War escalating, they probably sort of thought, right, this guy's not going to be viable, for want of a better way of putting it, I suppose.
Yeah, true.
This is kind of sparking something in my memory. You might be able to back me up with this, you might not, because I might have to do some further digging as it occurs. I have a memory of reading something somewhere, I think talking about a potential planned future storyline for either All-Star Squadron or Young All-Stars when they were going to bring in Gary Concord.
Yeah, travelling back in time, wasn't it not?
And finding that...
I remember that. I couldn't find anything about that.
Yeah.
But I've got a similar memory, yeah.
It was like he was going to come back to what was then World War II and find this is wrong, it's taking place. He was going to be man out of time. I don't know if it's something that was affected perhaps by the way Crisis on Infinite Earths played out, but it's I have it in my head as something that I've read. I'm glad that you have too. I'm glad it's not just me imagining things.
Weird.
So but anyway, yes.
He does reappear or get mentioned a couple of times. There's another character called Ultraman who appears in a flashback sequence in a story that we will cover eventually called The Last Earth Prime story in Superman 411. But it's not connected at all to Gary Concord.
Of course.
And also Grant Morrison in his Multiversity series had an issue called Ultra Comics that did feature a kind of version of Ultraman. I won't say any more than that. You should read Multiversity because it's very good. But yeah, he does make an appearance there. But obviously his biggest appearance that he's made was post-Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that was in Legionnaires Annual number 3.
Yeah, of course, because the Legion of Superheroes continuity was rebooted quite heavily after the 1994 miniseries 0 Hour. There was an introduction of a character called XS, who was a member of the Flash family, and at this point in the storyline, XS was one of my favourite characters. I loved her dearly. She was brilliant. Jenny, she was great. She's bouncing around in time at this point.
Yes.
I think it was summer of 1996. The branding for the common link between all of that year's DC annuals was Legends of the Dead Earth. In many ways, it was sort of Elseworlds by another name, but it projected future extrapolations for a lot of the characters. And the interesting thing about the Legionnaires Annual was it was probably the only one that actually tied into the main continuity for that series.
Correct. So it's not an Elseworld story. No. But because there's a time trapper involved and everything. So it's very good. But Jenny finds herself in the 100th century, and she comes across a group of freedom fighters there, and these are quite familiar characters. There's one called Avatar, who gains god-like powers when they clutch a weapon. There's one called Metallica, who wears a suit of armour. Right. And there's one called Behemoth, who's like an ordinary person who turned into a big hulking beast.
Yes.
Do these characters sound familiar to anyone at all?
Yes.
They're protecting a character who's in suspended animation.
Right.
And that character is Gary Concord Ultraman.
I was about to say, I can see where you're going with this.
Yeah. Basically, they're all Avengers analogues. The early Avengers analogues of Thor, Iron Man, Hulk, and Captain America. And basically, Jenny helps them, and they free Ultraman, and they fight injustice in the 100th century.
Yeah, he has a very sort of exaggerated, quite amusing sort of speech pattern, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
But it's great stuff, and it does actually cement him as part of somehow continuity at least at that time. The weird thing is, see when you look at when I look back and counted up all the page count for all the original Ultraman stories, it's 93 pages for absolutely everything.
Wow.
Gary Concord, like, the Golden Age stuff.
Yeah.
That'd make a lovely wee, 100-page special. wouldn't
Yeah,
it?
that'd be great.
It'd be so good.
I mean,
just to see that.
There's so many Golden Age stories and characters. We've already talked about Johnny Quick today. For the length of time he was published, the number of his stories that are available to read is minuscule.
Yeah.
It would be. I mean, I'd love a proper, Johnny Quick omnibus
That'd be
or archive or
incredible,
something, and it would be nice to be able to read all these Gary Concord stories.
Yep. There's a couple of honorary Ultraman mentions I want to make, and first one is in Adventure Comics 354. There is a story called The Adult Legion, which features, funnily enough, grown-up members of the Legion further in the future.
Yeah, because we mentioned them briefly with that torturous, awful Supergirl story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of them, of course, is the grown-up version of Ultra Boy, who calls himself Ultraman.
Yep, Joe. It's worth pointing out there's a charming moment in we probably will never cover it in the podcast, the series Final Crisis Legion 3 Worlds, when 3 different versions of the Legion all come together, and 3 versions of Phantom Girl are delighted at the fact that adult Ultra Boy, in this instance, still calls himself Ultra Boy.
Yes, he does.
It's lovely. They're all sort of cooing, and, oh, Joe, it's so cute, it's lovely. If you're a big fan of Joe and Tina like I am, it's terrific.
And of course, there's the Japanese TV character, I think it started in the 60s, called Ultraman, who has a massive history and following and fan base, but we're not going to go into that in any detail.
Yep. There's probably a podcast all about him somewhere.
I'm sure there is. And speaking of television, in the Lois and Clark series, in season 3 of that, Lois got powers and became Ultrawoman.
That's right. That's a brilliant story. I remember the bit when Dean Cain's Superman introduces her, and he sees a sign, an advertising sign for some, I think it's washing powder or something, and he goes, Ultra Woman, and as if he's just made it up on the spot. Yeah, that's great.
There we are.
Yeah.
So there's also other characters, many characters with the Ultra name, including Ultra, with 2 A's at the end, who we'll get to eventually as well. We'll definitely be covering Ultra's adventures on the show.
And there's also Ultra, the multi-alien.
Yes.
Another DC character of
short-lived from Mystery in Space.
Some repute who might pop up, actually. I've got a feeling he might pop up at some point.
Maybe.
You never know. I think he might be in Crisis, but he might not be.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes, and of course there's Ultra Humanite, who we definitely will be covering, because he is an Earth 2 character, so when he appears, we'll be talking about him. But yeah, as I said, that's all ultra great stuff.
That only leaves Power Ring.
Power Ring, we've saved the best for last, folks.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Power Ring is obviously the Green Lantern equivalent in the Crime Syndicate of America. He's based very visibly on Hal Jordan.
Yes, definitely.
It's probably the closest sort of analogue. And obviously we've talked about how there was another Johnny Quick, we've talked about how there was another Owlman, there were many Superwomen, and all about Ultraman.
Yes.
We've been all round the houses in Ultraman. But Power Ring.
Yes, the Power Ring's predecessor was no one.
Nope, we can't find a mention of another Power Ring at any point ever.
Nope.
It's always that they just sort of went, do we just call him Green Lantern, or what are we going to call him? Green Lantern, he's got a power ring. Oh, that'll do. And it works.
It works.
It works. It's very literal, but it's great. He's probably actually, out of them all the members of the Crime Syndicate, he's probably my favourite in terms of styling and appearance, because it's Hal one step removed.
Yeah.
You can almost imagine that being the regular Green Lantern costume. So this has been a look, if you like, at the inverse legacy of the Crime Syndicate of America.
Or ancestry.
Yeah, if you like.
Yeah.
It works just as well.
It does. Or injustice well.
Get out.
That's
awful.
Leave. It's been a very long record, folks, as you can possibly imagine.
Yes.
But we'd love to hear what you thought about all these characters and all the sticking we've been doing. Have you enjoyed it? Please get in touch with us. You can email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/theearth2podcast, and on Instagram also at the Earth2 Podcast, and on Twitter we're at podcast_Earth2.
Join us next time when we start the second Justice League Justice Society crossover and introduce you properly to the Crime Syndicate of America.
Yes.
So I've been David.
And I've been Peter.
And we will see you next time on
the Earth2 Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.